focuses on the unexpected and productive directions that careers can take after your graduation. Tonight, our panel of alumni welcome Jennifer, Bryce, and Justin Benjamin. We'll be focusing on linking their professional skills and interests to their after-hours pro bono work. All three of our panelists are initiators and leaders, and all three have been in on the ground floor of establishing new organizations. So I hope you'll find their leadership and generosity to their communities as inspiring as we do. Now, before I introduce the panelists, I would like to introduce Liana Zheng. Liana is a student in our undergraduate BDes program, and she is the current president of NOMAS, and she'll be the co-moderator tonight, directing the Q&A after the presentations. So hello, Liana. And now I will introduce our panelists before they begin their presentations. So Jennifer Cutbill is an architect and founding principal of Lateral agency. Armed with over a decade of international experience designing and delivering complex projects, Jennifer established her own office, Lateral Agency. Her firm works with and across teams, organizations, and communities to integrate collective intelligence and build collaborative capacity. The Jennifer that I know is absolutely tireless. In addition to starting her own office, she founded Vancouver Design Week against all odds, participates in the international movement Architects Declare, and advises various organizations, including currently chairing the UBC Urban Design Advisory Panel. So welcome, Jennifer. Bras Rajcic is an architect and principal of Rajcic Hemphill Architects, a practice that focuses on housing. And I've had the pleasure of working with Bryce in a couple of his pro bono roles, first as a member of the SALA advisory board, and later as a founding member of the Urbanarium. And alongside his many other philanthropic contributions, Bryce has a long history of contributing his time and resources to his alma mater, SALA, or UBC, serving on the UBC Board of Governors and chairing the UBC Development Permit Board. So I would say that Bryce models a very healthy life and work balance while generously still managing to serve others. And finally, Justin Benjamin Taylor is a landscape architect at Durante Crook. Before earning his master's degree in landscape architecture from SALA in 2016, he studied at Waterloo, receiving a professional degree in planning, majoring in urban design and minoring in knowledge integration. His master thesis gave further evidence of his interest in transdisciplinary studies by bridging landscape architecture and astroaeronautics. So Justin Benjamin's pro bono work involves charity ceramics and the development of an education-focused nonprofit, the Black and Indigenous Design Collective. And we look forward to hearing more about this. So welcome to you all. Each panelist has been asked to speak for 10 minutes, and the presentations will then be followed by a Q&A led by Liana. So to the audience, please post your questions in the chat and the speakers will address them at the end of all three presentations. And so now we're just moving in alphabetical order. Jennifer, if you would take it away.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Leslie. Okay, that awkward moment as I juggle dual screens. Just let me get my presentation up here. Share screen. No, this is not what we're going to start with. Just bear with. Let's start here, and I'm going to go to full screen mode. Okay, is everyone seeing this okay? Head nods. Wonderful. And I'm just going to set my timer. I know, Leslie, you're going to hold me accountable. Also, your Here we go. Well, first off, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak tonight. And I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion with both Bryce and Jeremy Benjamin. So it's, or JB, he'll correct me as to how he best likes to be called. So I'm going to look at a few examples. Specifically, we've been asked to talk about, as Leslie mentioned, linking. So I'm going to look at a few examples, but I'm going to try and focus more on the why, as well as the who and the how, and the often painful learnings that stem from these. So as Leslie already mentioned, my name is Jennifer. I'll add to that my pronouns are she, her. I'm a registered architect and founding principal of Lateral Agency, but more deeply, I'm the proud mother of this fierce little immunity builder in the center. I'm a sister, I'm an aunt, I'm the daughter of a military engineer turned doctor. My father went back to school in his 40s, and the daughter of a printmaker and textile designer mother who did her BFA in her 50s. This will become relevant a little bit later on. Their parents, in turn, were from a long line of military of British descent on my father's side and train engineers, railway engineers of Scottish, Irish, and French descent on my mother's side. So military, railway engineers, architects. So, and my mother worked briefly for the RCMP. So kind of a poster child for settler colonialism, which I am still very much grappling with and working to learn and unlearn how to reconcile this with a radically different future that I believe is possible and that we desperately need. So I was born on the traditional ancestral indigenous territories of the Anishinaabe, the Mississauga, the Haudenosaunee, the Algonquin, the Huron-Wendat nations in the place currently known as Kingston. I spent my formative years growing up literally out in the woods of the maple forests outside of an 800-person town, a couple hours outside of Ottawa. And then I came to Vancouver as an uninvited guest for grad school in 2017. And I fell in love with both the lands and my partner, and have been here ever since. And for the past 8 years, the longest I've lived anywhere, I've lived specifically on the lands known in Squamish Nitsum as Haiwa-esques, meaning narrow channel or separated points. And I'm thinking deeply into both this relationship and my roles in relational accountability to these specific lands in all aspects of my work and life. First, I'm going to backtrack a little bit and talk about what happened in between those periods and what links all of my various efforts together. So as part of my still evolving theory of change, or rather theory of transformation, I believe that it starts with changing our minds with what we believe is possible. So our imagination, and also that this is one of the greatest superpowers of design. And then we need to leverage this power, this agency for transformative change. And that we need to do this laterally. So not just bottom up and top down, but both and from all sides. So in relation to tonight's context, I'm going to start actually with my some of my work at SALA, specifically my thesis project, which focused on trying to regeneratively transform an estuarine community on Vancouver Island. And then I'm going to be working across these three nested scales, the idea of myself, the projects I'm working on, and all of them in relation to this largest circle, which is community. So I got really into rhizomes. I was taking electives in systems ecology while I was at SALA, linkage across disciplines. And so exploring rhizomes, many of you may know them in the form of grass roots, but while all grass roots are rhizomes, not all rhizomes are grass roots. They come in many forms. So I got really interested in this as not only a biological structure for, say, phytoremediation within regenerative design, but also as a philosophical concept for transdisciplinary collaboration in complex, ever-changing times. So at the time I was living on Vancouver Island, so I had focused my thesis project there on renegotiating various hierarchies and jurisdictional layers of control, focusing on a few key nodes within the community, ideally helping the communities of Courtenay Comox and the Comox Nation to collaboratively reimagine their collective regenerative potential, seeing themselves as connected rather than separated by water, at the vital and ever-shifting exchange between fresh and salt water, land and sea, and all of this in the context of changing tides. So after all of this mapping, proposed alternatives, I did work least I thought at the time. I was working effectively with community members. I exhibited at the local gallery on the Comox Nation's lands. But ultimately, and I missed mentioning, one of the efforts was to block a architecture design as activism was to block a gas station that was going to be put in right at the center of this vital estuary. I failed miserably. As you can see, this is a satellite photo of Comox Courtney today. The gas station was built, and insult to injury, there's a Frankie's Fried Chicken now right across the street. So while it felt like a crushing failure for months after this, it was incredibly useful for highlighting the critical importance of deep engagement with community, and that collaborative capacity building can't just be an academic or a conceptual exercise. Well, I thought I understood that. I realized I didn't. So I moved back to Vancouver full time, and I realized, well, I don't really have a network or a community here. I thought about starting Lateral Agency maybe as a nonprofit, but instead, as I was working with other community members, we got talking about the lack of affordable housing in Vancouver. So instead, we worked together to found a nonprofit called the Laboratory of Housing Alternatives, or LOHA, spearheaded by another SALA alum, Alicia Medina. If you don't know her, you should. She's fierce and fabulous, and a great example of linking. Ultimately, though, we were all architects, so we were bounded by a lack of linkages across disciplines. So after conversations with a number of others across town, we thought, well, wouldn't it be amazing if we could work better across disciplines, in addition to housing, a lack of affordable housing, a lack of this capacity to work across disciplines was something we felt was key. So after many conversations with many folks, including Leslie and Bryce and others, we founded something called Vancouver Design Week, led by this vision. To build a better future, we must first imagine a better one together, then design together to make it real. This is the power of design, and we envision a future where everyone has the power to use it. So against all odds, Leslie had mentioned, it was only by virtue of these lateral linkages, by working together with at first a small group, then a much larger group, then the broader design community, and then ultimately this network of supporters included the then Mayor, Gregor Robinson. Ultimately, we ended up hosting tours and talks and workshops and providing a collaborative platform for others to launch their own events. It actually went on for 2 weeks. We had almost 100 events and was attended by over 40,000 Vancouverites and others beyond. I show this only to highlight that it couldn't have happened without the immense, had we known how much time and energy it would take, it likely never would have happened, but the immense amount of energy and the unfortunate lack of support from the city. Anyways, there was great interest from the community, so we thought we'd come back again in 2 years. So we'd do this biennially. Instead, I needed to take some time out to focus on another project. I gave birth to my daughter Isabel in 2016. So we came back in 2017, but this time just for a weekend, through a big public street party, had all kinds of events, despite having talks at Vancouver City Council chambers, still no city support. So we founded Vancouver Design Foundation as a nonprofit arm to help with grant funding. We hunkered down and we came back in 2018, this time even bigger with even more collaborators. We bridged over to the North Shore. We brought in speakers from Europe, well, who happened to be here anywhere, and actually Allison's Canadian anyways, but it was a great draw. And again, the load on the team was incredible. So we realized that not only it's great to do these events, and while we were successful by many metrics, we needed to work on redesigning the model for how this happens. We were going to come back, well, keep going in order. So then the IPCC's report was released. Cities declared climate emergency. The missing and murdered women, Indigenous women and girls report came out. We realized the need for us to commit to greater action, and then COVID happened. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go a little bit faster. Vancouver Design Week community is still waiting in the wings, but while we're redesigning our network and doing some capacity building there, I felt called to focus on what our community of practice can do as architects. So in 2019, a group of UK designers launched something called Architects Declare. With a number of colleagues, we launched the Canadian version. We now have over 230 firms who have joined, and as a global network, it represents over 6,500 signatories. On the heels of this, we recognized that we need to get our own houses in order. So we founded Architects Divest, which focuses on divesting our, not just what we build, but our practices from financial institutions that support oil and gas. I also stepped back and looked at the way that we practice architecture. We were asked not to speak about our individual firms, but Lateral Agency is an exploration in an alternative model in how we leverage design, not just to build buildings, but to build agency across disciplines and sectors in a way that doesn't have to be all after hours. So pushing back on this idea of community building happening only after hours of our paying day jobs. Things are going well so far, but talk to me in a few months or years. Leslie touched on a few other linking efforts that I'm involved in. These stretch across advocacy, advisories, activism. As the Committee on Regenerative Environments, we presented to the Standing House and Senate committees in Ottawa. Yet still, there's incredible need, and also incredible need to redesign not just the models of how we practice, but also the economic and neoliberal, colonial, heteropatriarchal power structures within which we operate. So all of this has driven me to another linkage on the side, whatever that means these days. I'm pursuing a PhD at the intersection of regenerative economics and Indigenous governance, focusing on helping build collaborative capacity to reevaluate, to regenerate, to rethink and reimagine and redesign critical infrastructure in all of its myriad definitions. And then I'm helping the graduate and postdoc studies and the School of Public Policy and Global Affairs to develop transformative leadership curricula for PhD students across disciplines. I also wanted to take this, and I'm almost done, second last slide. I also wanted to take this opportunity to spotlight. These are but a few fabulous people who are contributing to their communities in amazing ways and who are launching new models and new modes of practice. If you don't know these individuals or their efforts, please do check out their websites. And Annie right now is fundraising, so please also scan her QR code to help with her fundraising efforts. It also got me thinking and talking with all of these fabulous folks. We really also lack, in terms of linkages, we lack the capacity to share what we're working on, to explore alternative precedents and models for integrating community work into our day jobs. We lack a way to let each other know what we're working on, and also to share resources and help lift each other up and build reciprocal collaborations. We kicked around a few ideas together, didn't really land on anything. So I thought, as designers, if any of that resonates with anyone, we thought we'd start in Miro as a board to kick around ideas. So if you're interested at all, please check out the link. And otherwise, I will end it there. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to the conversation.
Oh, thank you very, very much, Jennifer. That's excellent. It's exhausting listening to you, just thinking about all the things that you're doing. And I appreciate very much that you make the point that this work doesn't have to all be after hours. So thank you for that. Thank you very much. And now, Bryce, you're up next.
Thanks, Leslie. Oh, here we go. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to give you an overview of some of the things that I've done, many of the things that I've done. And you might be a little exhausted by that list, but afterwards, then I want to talk about motivation, why I do it, and what I might encourage you to do. As long as I can remember, I wanted to be an architect. And you can imagine the joy when I was accepted at the School of Architecture at UBC. I graduated in 1980, so that's 40 years, you guys. So when you look at the things that I've been doing, keep that in context. I became a registered architect in 1982, and I opened my own firm in 1984. The first years were a struggle. You know, it was difficult. That was a slow time, 1984, 85, until the market picked up. But I was passionate about being an architect, and I was also very interested in the profession and in the community around me. I started volunteering at the Architectural Institute of BC on committees, and then I was asked to sit on the Vancouver Safer City Task Force in 1992. After we had published the report, I was asked to sit on the Vancouver Safer City Commission. In 1995, I was elected to the Council of the Architectural Institute, and in 1996 became the president. I represented British Columbia across Canada on matters of architecture and profession and regulation, meeting nationally with people from all 10 provinces and the territories. I then got involved representing Canada with the US when we were having reciprocal agreements there about how to recognize professional jurisdictions and status. And from there then went to serve on the Canada, US, Mexico NAFTA committee. Architects were the first profession to be a trial to see how NAFTA could work with the professions. I sat on a number of urban design panels and community organizations. You know, once you start volunteering, it just keeps on going. In 2002, I was appointed to the UBC Board of Governors, in part because I was an architect, and there was a lot of new building going on at UBC, but also in part because of my prior community and perhaps national involvements. I chaired a number of committees on the board, including the joint UBC GVRD committee, the precursor to Metro. We had the joy of dealing with Direct Beach with high-rise residential towers, among a whole bunch of other things that was happening then. I represented UBC on the Hamber Foundation, and for 4.5 years on the Board of Governors, I chaired the Property and Planning Committee. That was, and still is at UBC, a heady time. There's just a lot going on, and we oversaw more than $1 billion worth of capital projects in the time that I played that role. At the same time, UBC was expanding and expanded to take over UBC Okanagan. We negotiated with Kelowna College in the province to have a UBC brand in the Okanagan. Part of my role at the Property and Planning Committee was to ensure that there was an appropriate master plan established for UBCO. On a slightly different note, about 3 years after graduation, a very close friend of mine died. He was a great, great guy. And because of him and the contributions that he made to the school, I set up the Jerry Allard Memorial Fund, which actually funds students to do whatever architecture students to do whatever they want to do that they think is going to engender a sense of community within the school. I also currently fund an entrance award to the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture Master's Program. I was delighted when Leslie Van Duzer invited me to join the SALA Advisory Committee. And as she mentioned, after that, that was a precursor, we restarted the Vancouver Urbanarium. So we're both founding members of the Vancouver Urbanarium. I currently chair the UBC Development Permit Board, and our office gets involved in a number of offers pro bono work to charities and other needy groups or groups that are should be beneficiaries of that kind of thing. So at this point, I think it would be fair to ask why? Why do all of this when you could be running a practice or skiing down the mountain or sitting back eating bonbons watching TV? Well, I grew up in a small town and in a working class family, and I was the first person in my immediate family to go to university. University, and particularly UBC, made a monumental difference for me. It allowed me to get out of my small town. It allowed me to see a larger part of the world, a bigger world. It gave me an opportunity to be an architect, which, as I mentioned, I always wanted to be a practicing architect and to be involved in a lot of amazing projects. We estimate that our firm has designed more than 25,000 housing units as part of our development. And I take pride in that because those were places where people are living, and I see that as an important contribution to the community. There are a number of people in our firm who were there early on in the start and who are still with the firm and are now senior shareholders of the firm. They've made shareholders. And again, that's a recognition of the power of working together in architecture. So why do it? I'm not crying, by the way, it's just, it's my glasses. You know, we're all fortunate. Everyone listening, I think, and everyone certainly on this panel and taking part of this, we're very fortunate for what we have. And I believe it's really important when you are that fortunate to give back, to be thankful for those opportunities, and to allow others to have opportunities that they might not otherwise have. You know, I want to make the community better, and I hope that you too will find opportunities as you're in school, you're working, it's a slog, it's just a lot of effort to try to get yourself established. But there'll come a point, and I hope it's early on in your future, if you're not already, that you find ways to give back to the community to volunteer. It's just so important for all of us. But as you could probably see from some of those slides, it's really important to have fun. You gotta have fun. So give back, work hard, and so on. I always say that my advice is work hard, be nice, and have fun. Thank you.
So Bryce, we need you to pull up your slides. And I know that they were just illustrative, but we haven't seen them yet.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, come on. Oh.
We didn't really need them to understand what you're saying, but I know that you would like to show them.
I can't believe it. Aren't those showing up on your screen?
No, they're not yet. You have to share your screen with us.
Oh, darn.
Can you go to the share screen at the bottom?
Yes. Jennifer is much better at this than I am, obviously. Jennifer?
There you go.
Okay, but I want to now are you seeing him in large scale, or are you just seeing him in the?
Oh, sort of. They're not quite in full screen mode yet.
Yeah, just let me do this one more time here. So if anybody wants to volunteer, I just did a presentation last evening that worked fine.
It's all right. We can see them. Oops,
Okay.
Now we lost.
Yep, I'm just going to take this one right here. Okay, now you can see.
Perfect.
And Leslie can hum some music while we're looking.
You don't want that. No, I would just reinforce that having known Bryce now for, I guess, 11 years, almost 11 years, I've always been impressed by that he runs a very successful practice. He plays hard, loves to ski, and has a lot of fun with his friends, but at the same time is a really big contributor to the various nonprofits and UBC. So in many ways, so I really admire that. And for all you future alumni out there, please take note. We appreciate so much the kind of loyalty that Bryce has and giving back to the community at large, but also to UBC and SALA in particular.
Okay, now these are the crescendo slides. There's just one more after this. Okay, Leslie, sorry.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you, Bryce. Great. So I think you have to stop sharing, and then I will just turn it over to Dustin Benjamin. Thank you. Thank you, Bryce. And Bryce, I think you should mute yourself. Thank you.
All right, can you see a full screen? I tried to test this earlier because I'm in the presentation view. You can? Okay, great. And hopefully the video works later. Thanks for having me. I am going to actually continue a bit of what Bryce was talking about. And I don't like to talk about myself too much. So the stuff that I do is near the end, but I think the way I was thinking of always start with the why and try to think about the problem. And so to me, the why is like, why volunteer? Why do I volunteer myself? And I'm going to share about how I think about work in general, but then maybe hopefully how why I think you should volunteer as well. And if we could get, a couple people, I think we did our jobs today. So when I was growing up, I had my parents and they wanted me to be a good person and a positive force in the world. And they always, told me, do good things for other people and kind of this whole karmic cycle. But it was an external motivator. And, as I grew up and kind of gained some independence and went off on my own. So I think a little bit more of an argument is this kind of two-pronged argument that I'm not going to say as eloquently as this original source. I'm going to try to play this video. If it doesn't work, then I'll try to summarize it. But let me know if you can't hear it, just because I can't see anyone. Let me know.
Thinks that the system, the way we have it, can manage itself. And that as an individual, you don't have to try to change the system, that we should just take care of, how to put it, that, as he said, first, Jordan Peterson, first put your house in order, then try to change the world. No, I think that quite often more and more people cannot put their house in order precisely because of the way the world is structured. I think we will have to act collectively on a large scale.
Trying to understand the difference between Slavoj Žižek, the Lacanian Hegelian philosopher, and Jordan Peterson, the clinical psychologist, this is a pretty good place to start. How do we change the world? Do we start with individual action, which is what Jordan Peterson believes, or do we start with collective action, which is what Slavoj Žižek believes? Now, in both cases, we have a very different view of understanding individual agency. Peterson says that you have to start with your own self because that's the only thing you can control. Worse, if you try to have collective action before individual action, you end up with a totalitarian system where you tell people how to act and what to think. Žižek, on the other hand, counters that to focus on individual action is to actually exclude the manner in which most people don't have the means to change their own lives. Worse yet, that focusing on individual action is actually what keeps the system as it is. If we keep telling ourselves that we can survive by means of little adjustments to our individual lifestyles, nothing will change and we're all doomed. Vice versa, Jordan Peterson says that if we focus only on collective action, we will get nowhere. We're much more likely to have success by focusing on individual agency than collective action, which actually lulls us into a false sense of security where we don't have to participate. This is the deadlock of our time: particular change versus universal change.
Great. So hopefully everyone heard that, and if not, I'll summarize. There's kind of these two approaches, and I'd take a poll if we had time, but I don't think we do. And I'm not really saying that either side is right. I think it's quite nuanced, and I fall somewhere in the middle of this. I really hope and wish and pray for our society to, gather together as grassroots, revolutionary, collective action to change our society. But these days I feel, maybe that might not happen, and not to try to expect it. And, we have this quote of hope for the best and expect the worst, which means we can't really wait on that to happen. So I think, like Bryce just said, we're all in quite privileged positions, to be, in academia and these disciplines, and that if we find ourselves with time on our hands, that maybe we should do something with it. And I think that my overarching point with this talk here is, to not just kind of look around and see issues and complain about them, but to try to do something about the problems you see. And then once you're actually doing stuff about those issues, then you get to complain. So I think, to be honest, and to go back to motivations a little bit, once those external motivators are gone, we all kind of have our own kind of internal barriers and motivations. For me personally, the main thing, and for you probably, is time. That I have problems starting new projects, or I do now, starting new projects if I don't have enough time. And I'm not going to start something new if I don't think I can do it, right? I only want to do things that I'm good at. And I like to have some value returned to me. Like, all of these things are okay to admit and acknowledge.
JB,
just for, yeah.
I just want to interrupt you because your slides are not clear, and I'm wondering, there it goes. Okay, thank you.
Oh, sure. Let me try and share, because I think I might have optimized it for the video. And is this a little clear?
It's okay now. Thank you.
Great. Yes. Just the idea that, we don't have to all start our own new things, right? That if we see a problem out there, like, I guarantee there's probably already a group trying to address it, and to just kind of find the things that you care about, find the people who are working on it and help them. And if there isn't somebody doing that, then at that point, maybe you can consider starting something. So now to get into my own work a little bit, and I was going to touch on work-life balance and all that, but I think I'm going to skip a bit of this so I don't. But mostly the point of the slide was to say that, again, the first thing I think about is time and work-life balance. Oh, it says my internet connection is unstable. I've been quite lucky where I work to have a lot of autonomy and flexibility, and not to be doing a ton of overtime. So I've been able to have a good balance. And I guess my point was that practice is not always going to be, it's not going to be like design school. And in some sense, finding a dream job or a perfect job is optimistic. And I think, a lot of people want to have a lot of variety in their life. So finding one place that fills all your needs, maybe a little optimistic. So I think for myself, it's been prudent to kind of start thinking about my career as, a way to get by, and then to use all that extra bandwidth to do the things I love, and to do that practice that I really am trying to find outside of my work, rather than trying to find, the perfect position. So that brings me to what I have been doing outside just in the past year, is the Black and Indigenous Divine, not pictured. This is Crystal, our arts director, but Divine and Sierra, who were working together on a project in Falls Creek, and they were floating the idea of working together in the near future. And then last summer, when George Floyd was murdered, that was just a catalyst, like a universal catalyst. And, the SALA students wrote faculty, and I think the way I connected with Divine and Sierra was that Divine reached out to me the SALA ends Instagram posted some of our thesis work, and we had a lot of conversations as a and actually this term we are teaching vertical studio. So within the span of a year, I feel like a lot of change has occurred, and it makes me incredibly optimistic that this organization can continue on its pathway, trying to be a catalyst for change. And the main problem that we're trying to address, and I think, oh, I did write it here. It's not a critique, just even looking around Vancouver, is 2% of the population is Black, but that the Black Landscape Architects Network has 155 members, only 5 members in Canada. Anyone who's not registered, there's 682 registered landscape architects. So that is a minuscule fraction. And I think the problem is just like when there was this outpouring of support last summer, it's kind of like, well, who are they going to ask? And, so the point of the Black and Indigenous Design Collective is focused on solidarity and is focused on education to try to raise awareness within the Black and Indigenous communities of these professions so that they know they're there and can apply to that, and then to increase the representation through all the linking that we're discussing. And then the other one, which is a little more easy, and it makes more sense for being a student, is like I had this hobby of doing pottery, and last year was a tough year on a lot of people. I was at home a lot and a lot of stuff was happening, and I said, I wish I could give more to all these different organizations, right? And so I earlier this year kind of shuffled it into a bit of a mini business, made a website, and just started selling work. And I've had 4 little sales, and I've given to 4 different charities about $1,200, and it's not a lot, but it's more than zero, and it's more than before. And I think the encouragement I'd have for you is, again, outside of school, outside of work, find what you enjoy doing, find problems that you see, and see if there's people already doing it, go and help them. And if they're not doing it, try to start something yourself.
Great. Thank you very much, JB. Thank you. So I would like to just thank all the panelists for your presentations, and they're inspiring just to see how much you're up to, and also the spirit with which you're giving. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Liana, who may have some questions for you, either from the chat or from herself, to get us going.
I do. Thank you all for your presentations. They were all so fascinating. The amount of work you do is absolutely incredible. I will start with a few of my own questions, and if anyone that is in the participants have any questions, please feel free to type them in. But I will start with Jennifer. So I actually have Alicia Medina as my professor right now, currently in my studio. So she's teaching us quite a bit about co-housing, especially in Vancouver, and how to design based on those principles. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. But you did talk about kind of these nonprofit organizations that you are currently a part of, and especially Design Week. I find that initiative very interesting. So I was wondering if you have ever considered teaching, or have you considered extending these nonprofit organizations to perhaps like the educational level, just because I think that these sort of conversations are starting to be held with a lot of like younger students, whether that be post-secondary or even in high school and elementary. So I was just wondering if you ever considered doing anything like that.
Thanks, Liana. Thanks for sharing. I'm glad you're studying with Alicia. That's fabulous. Please tell her I say hi. Yeah, so I'll answer your question directly, but I'll maybe also answer what I read in as an implicit kind of question within that. So yes, I love teaching in all of its forms. I did teach as adjunct faculty a couple of years ago, the regenerative design and development course, and I'm very grateful for that experience, and also to speak at John Bass's future practice class. Oh, the lights go out here if I don't move. Excuse me, I'm just gonna, okay, they'll maybe come on eventually. So yeah, I really enjoy that and would love to do more. I'm also enjoying the curriculum development work, teaching in the School of Public Policy, focused on transformative leadership. So I really enjoy that as well. But I wanted to just press on, and here's the implicit reading. You let me know if I'm misreading this, but this idea of models like the nonprofit versus the for-profit versus Lateral agency as a social venture. So kind of rides that in between, that hybrid space, bridging across these different models. But I really think this idea of how we practice and how we bridge the gap and link between and are much more fluid, but in a nurturing and reciprocal way between ideas of work and life, or rather of vocation and health and sleep and all of those things. So I think the nonprofit model is one way of doing this, but I think it also comes from this like entrenched sort of Protestant power structure idea of, you know, you have this, you do your work and then you give back, you know, after hours, and only, I mean, the implication there is that it's less than what you're doing in your day job. And then by virtue of their very structure, oftentimes nonprofits end up being hierarchical. You need a certain number of people on the board. I mean, there are ways around it, but I'm always interested, and I'd love to hear more from JB and Bryce, yourself as well, being involved in so many different groups, but JB especially, given what you just ran us through, other ways that we can think about how we fill these gaps of what's needed in creating new things, and also of those things that do exist, what's working that we want to lift up and amplify, and what isn't working that we need to think into transcending or transforming together. So with that, I'd love to hear others' thoughts if they're interested.
Please jump in.
Yeah, sure. I guess that was a question to me. The part I heard that I felt was relevant is the non-hierarchical nature of the organization itself, which we're still working through. We're still in the early days. We're 5 months out from having, you know, created and tried to register a board, but the whole discussion the past few months has been, how do we have this organization be different and set up and structured differently? And you know, we're in the process of learning. I haven't been in a whole bunch of organizations, and so it's a lot of knowledge sharing right now between some people who have a little bit more experience and those of us who are kind of just starting into this space. So it's educational for myself, but yeah, we are really trying to figure out how to do it differently and not have the president, vice president, and treasurer, you know, all that stuff. So that's a good question. Still figuring it out.
Yeah, that's great. I've always was very curious about these organizations on a professional level. And actually currently, so I am the current president of UBC NOMAS, the National Organization of Minority Architecture Students. So we have been trying to work with a few local firms in Vancouver to also have these same conversations. And I actually had a question for JB on a similar note. So we have been talking with this studio called Human Studios, and they've been trying to create this initiative to send out these surveys to multiple architecture firms to see which architects are registered and which ones aren't. And what they discovered was that a lot of Indigenous or Black or Latino or just BIPOC practicing architects aren't actually registered in the system. So I would like to ask JB, what do you think kind of needs to be done to support more Black and Indigenous architects to become recognized and also registered? Or is there like some sort of support that you can give them?
I think partially the premise of requiring accreditation is something that I'd maybe a little bit question. But the fact of the matter is, like, yeah, it's hard unless we're in these organizations and these organizations are visible. Like, I only just found out about Human Studio this past week. And Bruce Hayden was actually my mentor when I was in SALA. So you know, unless these I think it just needs to be a better job of representation, and you know, whether it's a database or something of like Jennifer had at the end of her presentation, of shouting people out, is like, how else are we supposed to know who's around and connect? I think the representation and the awareness parts need to be worked on, and maybe that's social media, maybe that's more community panels like this that attract people who are interested in it. But yeah, I'd be curious to hear what Jennifer thinks, or Bryce.
I'd just like to jump in. I think that there are lots of opportunities throughout that whole spectrum, whether it's in your own practice, whether it's part of an organization, or whether it's part of a nonprofit, or whether it's part of a startup, that we all have talents and energy that we can bring. And sometimes it's harder in an established organization because you've got the momentum and the history built in. But we all need to be stepping in at all sorts of levels to see where we contribute and to see what we can do and what we can change, and to agitate for that change.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like I'm talking too much, but I'll jump in there. JB, that really, well, both of those comments really resonate, but especially this idea of like, how do we figure out what else is out there, who else is doing what. Hence, then I'll put the link to that mirror board in the chat. I mean, this is one of the motivations for starting Vancouver Design Week. Like, so often I would bump into people that literally right next door, or the weekend before, the weekend after throwing an event, they were doing something amazing that I'd never heard of. So rather than this, constant drive to recreate the wheel or to redesign these systems, ourselves or with our own small groups, how can we? And I'm still thinking into the philosophies of the speaker that you wrote. I think I too am between the Peterson and the Zizek camp in terms of we need to change our own mindsets, not necessarily our own actions, but we need that collaborative action piece. And to do that, we need better ways to figure out who's doing what and how to connect with each other. So if there's anyone that wants to jam on that, yeah, I would definitely love to talk more and to see how we can harness the resources and connections and platforms of Vancouver Design Week and Lateral Agency. And I can't put others on the spot, but if anyone else has other organizational networks or resources they can lend to it, it would be great if we could all do what do we have, what do we need to help move that forward.
I keep thinking how great it would be if younger people sort of infiltrated these existing networks that have been around for a long time. Things like Rotary clubs and Kiwanis clubs, which are, first it would be like, but these are groups that exist to do good things for their communities, and the structures are so robust. And it's my dream, actually, that instead of everybody sort of starting new things all the time and expending a lot of energy on that actually look for some of these existing structures and actually carry them on in new directions, perhaps. But why not build on some of those really solid organizations?
It's a great challenge, Leslie. I agree with that tremendously. That's how you get rejuvenation. Universities are as successful as they are because they're opportunistic. They change with time and demands and so on. And it's a very structured organization. It's one of the oldest structured organizations in the world, in modern world. And they survive because they are constantly changing, and they have new input, and they have radicals and new ideas and so on. So I support that tremendously.
Yeah, and I do want to add that everybody on the screen here has been involved with starting new organizations. And so oftentimes there is a gap that needs to be filled. But I think there's a sort of tendency to do that now, particularly with younger people, that people want to have their sort of own thing. And I just feel like there's so many networks that could be built upon. But filling the gaps is also extremely worthwhile. And there are many.
Yeah, I agree with your point for sure. And before we started Bid C, or we're talking about starting Bid C, I was looking and talking with other organizations, one of which was in Ontario, one was here, that, trying to find somewhere to fit in and blend my skills and, graphic communication, whatever skills you have, there is somewhere that you could fit in. And I think, on our website, we have this 2050 vision, like we're under no apprehensions that, trying to increase the number of Black and Indigenous people who want to go into the spatial design fields is going to be an overnight thing, right? We need to be going from high school and maybe even younger and hoping that over the next decades that it changes to proportions that aren't token, but that the same, if we're thinking about 2050, which is a few decades from now, starting an organization or getting into an existing organization and learning about it and growing with them and gaining some power, and then as you are higher in the organization, to start implementing ideas that you have with a train that's already moving, and just shifting course on something already moving is a little easier than getting something moving. So I think there's a lot of validity to trying to find what's out there that you already jive with.
Yeah, I'll build on that to say the finding those leverage points for change within organizations. I loved the use of infiltration, where you can infiltrate to be able to press on and affect change rather than just sustaining systems that, some of them really, might need to just be torn down or dismantled or fall by the wayside, atrophy, and be replaced with new ones. Whereas others, I think, yeah, there is incredible resources and momentum that with slight, or maybe more than slight, tweaks can be transformed. So I think it's all of those. But I love your filter of build, co-create what's needed and amplify what's already working, and then maybe adding to that this dismantling of things that are maybe not, or letting fall by the wayside things that are just not too entrenched in current structures to be able to affect the change that's so needed.
Yeah, okay. This is something that I noticed immediately was like talking about how to get in touch with younger students, or or just people that are studying, whether that be in architecture or landscape architecture. So I think I wanted to direct this question to Bryce. Could you talk a little bit more about Urbanarium and also how students can get involved? Because that is an existing nonprofit organization that you founded. So are there any ways for us to kind of get into that conversation?
Absolutely, there is. Leslie can provide some links and so on, electronic links on how to get there. But the Urbanarium is really just a group of volunteers, and it relies so heavily on volunteers. We have the debate series. Leslie was instrumental in setting that up. We're going to have a new series of debates in January. People come and contribute and be part of the organization for that. For the debates is great. We have a competition that's underway. So there's lots of opportunity for people to come in and with their own ideas and energy, and bring in others who have energy too. So absolutely, there's lots of opportunity.
We have a lot of volunteer opportunities, Liana, where you can get into the organization in that way. But also there's a board, I can't encourage people enough to join nonprofit boards. Whatever your passion is, saving animals, whatever your passion is. It's a marvelous form of leadership to serve on a board. And it brings you into contact with lots of interesting people that are sometimes outside of your circles, depending what kind of board you're on. But I believe also, even as students, that you guys might have opportunities to serve on some nonprofit boards, and you should take advantage of that. It's really great leadership training.
And further to that, Leslie, I just want to say, on my time, I was 6 years on the UBC Board of Governors, and we had student representatives, first 2 and then 3 when we expanded UBC Okanagan. I was always impressed. Some of them were agitators that poked a little bit, that might hurt just a bit, but every one of them was committed, and they offered a different perspective. And I can tell you that everybody from the president to faculty to appointed members really, really appreciated the conscientiousness and input from students. So absolutely.
Yeah, that's great to hear. It's definitely difficult, I think, even though I wasn't necessarily the one that founded UBC's chapter of NOMAS, but just being on the board for only the past few months, I think it really opened my eyes and showed me like how much work and effort this really is. It is truly incredible that you guys have worked on so many of these. I'm completely like in awe of everything. And I think I can move on to the questions from the attendees. So someone said that thank you for all the amazing presentations. Each of you talked about the importance of pro bono work in architecture and related fields, but pro bono or socially conscious focused work is not a huge part of design curricula or standard practice. Assuming that they are correct. Do you think that this will change in the future? And how can pro bono design work be more normalized in the field?
It will change if you want it to change.
Yeah, I would also argue or suggest that you have to have income to support yourself to do pro bono work. So it's really a balancing between the two. You have to have active participation and then pro bono participation, and the two work very much together.
My immediate thought was it's like almost verbatim JB's comment, it will change if we change it, like change in the doing, in the practice. We don't have to have it all figured out either. And maybe I'm saying this aloud just to make myself feel better for not having it all figured out. But I think there are so many different ways that we can do this. Needing to have the nest egg in order to launch is one. But I know at least from starting my own practice, I didn't have a lot of funds from bigger commissions before I went out on my own. So a lot of the value, the startup value, sorry, my lights are going, I'll do the crazy dance in the background. A lot of the value has come from the relationships that I've had with others. And a lot of those, I guess, have come from, I mean, some of them came explicitly from volunteering and nonprofit efforts. Others came from just bumping into people in the community, kind of finding each other doing similar things and doing yeah, we should find a way to collaborate sometime. So I've been really thinking into like, what does a social venture model mean? What does value mean? I mean, we're so used to thinking about it in the neoliberal terms of financial value, but there's so many other modes of value. I mean, think about how much time we spend chasing proposals, like all of that free work. Whereas a lot of my work now, I'm very grateful that people just come to me from having worked with them in the past and say, hey, I just really love to work with you. So all of that money not spent writing proposals that end up in no work is actually a form of, of cold, hard dollars and cents value saved. So yes, and I'd also challenge us to think more into, again, this like organizational model design, like what are other ways that we can think about value and approaching design and the design of relationships in more reciprocal ways. I totally don't have it figured out, but I'd love for anyone's thoughts and experiences and learnings and all the rest.
Jennifer, I think you're a master at what I always try to tell the students. It pays to ask, like just ask. And you were a little too modest when you were describing your starting of the Vancouver Design Week. And you're right that you were able to collect a lot of support from a lot of people. But you really, at least from my perspective, just being very on the outside of that, you really initiated and led that effort. And so one thing I want to say is when you're talking about trying to make organizations less hierarchical, I think that's a little problematic personally, because in my experience, you have to have strong leaders. And, no matter who those people are that emerge as the ones who are going to put the most work into something, who are really willing to stay on it, doesn't mean it's the oldest person or the person with the most experience or the most money, or not that kind of hierarchy. But it's pretty hard to run a nonprofit or any of these kind of initiatives if you don't have one or two people where the buck stops with them, that they really take hold of whatever the initiative is and run with it. And of course, you need a lot of collaborators. But that's my experience, at least. That's how things get done. And so I would really, I don't think flattening everything actually works, because it's too, it's like nothing, things don't get decided that way. It's like at some point things have to get decided and move forward. So that's my own experience. Yeah.
I hear what you're saying, and I think in some ways that's right, that you do need a strong direction, otherwise you stagnate. I think in our organization we're thinking about Indigenous worldview and protocol is sometimes to be slower than it needs to be. I think in some ways the capitalist prerogative is to move quickly, to maximize. There's always to maximize. But that being said, I think when we're talking about, rather than starting organizations, to go into organizations and transform them. If I go into an existing organization and I seek to transform it rather than subvert it by gaining power and changing it myself, it's going to require the leadership to cede some control to the people with the new ideas. And I think when we're talking about having a non-hierarchical leadership is for whether one person is kind of doing the most work or is seen as the leader of the organization. And I think it's like what we tell students working in groups is, even if one person did everything, when you go to present, say we, and if not, we'll dock you points. And it's like, if the leader, even the one that's doing the most work and is willing to cede, their, some of the applause to others, it does kind of encourage everyone to step up, I feel like. So yeah, it's definitely a balance. But well, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that, JP. Liana, I think we should wrap up in the next couple of minutes. I don't know if you have some other question from the audience or any final question.
Yeah, there is one more from the audience. Jordan asks, what in your opinion is the future for architecture?
Oh,
okay. In 1 minute or less.
I'd love to grab that. Architecture is going to be around for a long time. The great thing about architecture is it's global thinking. You have to bring together people and politics and math and art and all of the stuff. You have to listen a lot. You have to do a lot. You have to be creative. How can that not be a positive profession or activity to be part of? Architecture will always be around.
Yeah, we'll just end with a small question, the future of architecture. Yeah, well, I think we will always need to dwell. We will need structures to build in. I believe that the practice of architecture and what it will look like for all of us will be changing radically. I mean, some of that is obvious, but I think in how we think about what it means to deliver our instruments of service and what those are, I think it's going to shift a lot away from well, and this of course betrays my own bias, but from just architecture and the delivery of things to the design of relationships and systems and what that means. The idea of liability, I think, is going to change drastically as well. And I think it needs to get more collaborative and extend beyond just after we've done our final occupancy review. What exactly that means, I don't know, but I think it opens up, while it will be very challenging, I think it opens up some really interesting opportunities. And also, I mean, the model of architecture, just building on Leslie's comment about hierarchy, and I totally don't have this all figured out, and I too agree or believe that it's going to be a meshwork, top down, bottom up. We need both. But what I'm really fascinated in, and I'm reading a lot of also Indigenous scholars about, especially Jeanette Armstrong and Leanne Simpson, who's Anishinaabe, and Jeanette Armstrong is Silex, this idea of just having enough hierarchy where it's needed, just having enough leadership when and where it's required, as opposed to calcifying and ossifying these things into fixed power structures, which tends to be how things happen in our broader society and also in architecture. So pulling that back, what does that mean? Well, someone's seal is actually on the drawing, so we still need those clear lines of accountability. But I think there are yeah, again, radically different ways that we can think about what it means to collaboratively put buildings together, and what skill sets we have and how we can contribute that to co-designing and co-building the future that we need.
JB, you want to close us out?
Sure, I'll take the future of landscape architecture. I think the last 2 years almost has kind of shown everybody the importance of the space between buildings. I think the social value of landscape architecture and public space is going to increase. And then also, I mean, climate change is big on the agenda for, you know, Gen Z, millennials, everyone who's going to be around for a while. So I think landscape architecture has a lot to speak to in terms of ecology and social construct.
Yeah. Great. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Liana, for running our Q&A. Thank you very much. And thanks to the panelists. That was great. You bring a lot of, I don't know, I feel really positive energy also to the discussion. So thank you very much for your time tonight. And thanks to the audience for tuning in. And in the background, I also want to do a shout out to Victoria, who's made everything run smoothly tonight. And then I would just ask you to join us again on November 18th for the final event in the Tangent series, which is called Shifting, when my colleagues Thina Tak and Amelia Bradisfer will host a discussion with alumni who have completely changed professions after graduation. And so it'll be a very different kind of conversation, and we hope you'll come back.
Thank you so much.
Here's everyone.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Good night.
Thanks so much to Leslie, Liana, everyone for organizing. Thanks,
Thank
JB, Bryce.
Thank you all. Good night.